Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to week 10 and happy Halloween to you. I have on my Halloween scarf, I have on my Halloween shirt, and if we had been meeting in a real classroom, I would have even had on my Halloween socks. I am a holiday fanatic. I like all holidays. Even the ones that don't necessarily fit in with my own particular beliefs or traditions. I just love to celebrate holidays. So I miss that about being on campus with you guys. We would always have a fantastic celebration for Halloween and for other holidays, and I miss that very much. So today I want to talk to you about external form in poetry. Last time around, we talked about internal structure, and now we're looking at the external, the outer part of the poem. And if you want to follow along with me, you can go to content, to course documents, and then look for external form in poetry. So, tone and speaker and situation, setting, theme, diction, which means the word choice, imagery, sound, the general arrangement of the words. We know from last week that that's called internal structure or internal form in poetry. But the external, the outer form of the poem relates to its overall arrangement on the page and into visual units. So the internal part of it is, it's still somewhat visual because we're looking at it, right? If we're reading it. But the external relates almost completely to that. So this sheet gives you a listing of some different types of external forms found in poetry. And the first ones that I give you, letters A through I, are traditional, are fixed forms. And so the sonnet, and it can be either Italian, also called Petrarchan, or English, also called Shakespearean, and a sonnet will always consist of 14 lines of iambic pentameter, and that's how we recognize it. It might be what's called a terza rima, and that's where the first and third lines of each stanza will rhyme, and the middle line will then rhyme with the first and third lines of the next stanza. So it's a very difficult sort of form to create when you're writing. There's the Spenserian stanza, and that's named after Edmund Spenser, in which only 3 rhyme sounds are used in 9 rhymed lines. And then the ballad stanza. There's only one set of rhymes found in 4 lines. Lines 1 and 3 do not rhyme, but lines 2 and 4 are rhymed. And they're iambic trimesters, so 3 beats to a foot. There's the haiku. You may have heard of that, or you may be familiar with it. It's an unrhymed Japanese poetic form. It consists of 17 syllables arranged in 3 lines, usually in its classic form, containing 5, 7, and 5 syllables, respectively. And so the haiku suggests a lot, right? But in the fewest possible words. That's sort of one of the hallmarks of the haiku. There's a limerick, and Irish people like limericks. So it's a kind of humorous verse of 5 lines in which the first, second, and fifth line are going to rhyme with each other, and the third and fourth lines, which are shorter than the other lines, form a rhymed couplet, so 2 lines that rhyme together. There's the villanelle, a short poem of fixed forms, and it's written in tercets, usually 5 in number, and it's followed by a final quatrain, and they're all based on 2 rhymes. And then there's the palindrome, and this is kind of a cool one. So a word, a verse, or a sentence such as "Able was I ere I saw Elba," or a number like 1881. It's a thing that reads the same thing backward or forward. And you can actually create a poem that will do that. The sestina, and I had to write a sestina in graduate school. It's hard to do. It's a poem of 6 line stanzas and a 3-line envoy, originally without rhyme, in which each stanza repeats the end words of the lines of the first stanza, but in a different order. The envoy using 6 words again, 3 in the middle of the lines and 3 at the end. So it's like, what? This is so complicated. But those are some of the traditional or fixed forms. And then you have non-traditional forms like concrete poems. And these are really cool. And we're looking at a concrete poem this week. So poems that are composed so that when you see them in their entirety on the page, they look like a shape of something, like a physical object or a living creature. And then visual poems, so they may not resemble a specific shape, but they may depend on the wholeness of their visual form on the page to help establish the meaning of the poem. And then you have poems that are combinations of various forms, and we saw that last week with internal structure. So you have the same thing with external form. And so when you first look at a poem on the page, you might notice that its external form looks different, almost as if the words are designed to form a particular shape. Well, if that's the case, it's probably a concrete poem. And then alternatively, you might notice that the poem possesses a very traditional sort of look to it. So it might be a sonnet, it might be a terza rima or a sestina. And sometimes you may notice that a poet will make the effort to defy a traditional form by reworking it in some way to fit his or her own ideas. So a poet might write a sestina but kind of defy some part of that traditional form. So questions to ask yourself when you're thinking about the external form: is the poem divided up into traditional stanzas, or is there unusual spacing within the poem? Does it rhyme, or is it written in free verse, and that means no rhyme? Is it written in a traditional or fixed type of form? Is it a concrete poem? How do those choices affect you as a reader? So remember, external form gives you yet another element to write about in paper 2. I'm leaping ahead to paper 3. We're just at paper 2. So that's the document on external form, which will be helpful to you as you are doing this week's discussion board activities. And the other document that will be helpful to you is one that is about using 8 steps to respond to a poem. And I'm looking for it here. You can find it again under course documents, Responding to Poetry, 8 Concrete Steps. And you'll also be using it in the second topic of the week 10 discussion boards. Or board, I should say. So here are those steps really quickly. And you should do this with the poem that you're writing about in paper 2. And again, this all gives you material to actually write about in your paper. So look at the title. Look at the first line or two. Remember, we've said the title is the first way that a writer has to communicate with you, the reader. So you want to think about, okay, what do I think about? What do I associate when I see the words in that title? What kind of image does it give me? What are the connotations of those words? And what kind of expectations do I as a reader have when I see the title? And then does the actual poem fulfill those expectations, or does it sort of deny them? And remember that poets can use false leads to try to surprise us with a hook of some sort. Don't let that throw you off. That's a technique you could write about, in fact, if that's the case, in the poem that you've chosen. And as you continue to read, pay attention to what you expect and when, where, and how the poem fulfills or does not fulfill those expectations. So that's step 1. And then step 2, read the syntax, the order of the words literally. Just read it. And identify sentences or phrases ignoring the line breaks, because remember we said the sentence or the thought might not end where the line ends. It might extend on into the next line and the next, and even throughout the poem. So one way to help you is to pick out a subject, verb, and object, if there is one, of each sentence or phrase, if you're struggling to figure out where does the thought actually end. If the poem is an older work or a work that makes use of very, very formal type language, try to translate the sentences into more modern language so that you can access its meanings. So you might have to look up some of those archaic words that you don't quite understand. But see if you could just jot down on a piece of paper, okay, if I were going to say this right now in 2020, what would I say? And that'll help you access meaning. Step 3, use your dictionary, reference book, or websites to look up anything you do not understand. So any type of historical reference, maybe it's an allusion, right, to a person who actually lived or an event that happened with which you might not be familiar. Look up the meanings of unfamiliar words. Maybe it's an idea from mythology. Maybe it's a place that's being referenced that you're not knowledgeable about. Look it up, and that will help you to figure out the poem's meaning. And then think about the connotations of the words and phrases in the poem. So not the literal dictionary meaning again, but the associations that we're making with those words and phrases. Step 4, you're going to, just like in fiction, ask the who, what, when, where, how, and why questions. Who is the speaker or speakers? Who is the audience? Who's being addressed by the speaker? What characters appear in the poem? Where is the speaker? When and where are the events taking place that he or she describes? When in history? Where in the world? What is the situation being described in the poem? What literally happens? If the poem doesn't tell a story, if it isn't a narrative poem or a ballad poem, then how is it structured internally? Does the subject or the focus shift over the course of the poem? Remember, we said that in internal structure, we might see a shift. So if so, when and how? The next step, formulate tentative answers to each of the questions above in an effort to sort of put it all together and understand why it all matters and what it all means. So why should this topic being written about matter to anybody other than the poet, right? What problems, issues, questions, or conflicts within that poem might be relevant to other people or to us today or universal? And there you're kind of getting at theme. How is each problem or conflict approached and resolved within the poem? It may not be resolved. What conclusions does the poem seem to reach? And it may not reach any. It may just leave you with questions. Step 6, consider how the poem's form contributes to its effect and its meaning. So how is it put together? What are its formal features internally and externally? So is it utilizing rhyme, metaphor, simile, symbolism, alliteration? So words that begin with the same sound close together. I just did it with the S sound. So how do these elements contribute to meaning? So in other words, what would get lost if you tried to translate the poem's language into modern, just everyday speak? What would be lost? Number 7, how does the poem draw on or depart from poetic tradition? So especially in terms of its formal features. So is it conforming to a very traditional fixed pattern like a sonnet or a ballad or a villanelle? Does it contain rhyme, or does it seem to break away from these traditional forms and ideas? Because that's going to tell you something about the ideas that are trying to be imparted in the poem. And then the last step, argue, and I don't mean in a bad way, but discuss the poem with somebody else to share your interpretations and learn how the other person's ideas might differ from your own. So those are those 8 steps that help you to respond to a poem. And the other readings for this week are Easter Wings by George Herbert, and A Village Without Bells by Matsuo Basho, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas, Call to Arms by Foro Farrokhzad. And so then in the discussion board, you'll consider external form in this week's poems. And then the second topic on the board will be using those 8 steps that we just discussed to respond to a poem. Your idea worksheet for paper 2 will be due, so hopefully you're generating some ideas. You can answer the questions to the worksheet and upload them. Do that before Wednesday, the 28th at 11:59 p.m. And then there's some Halloween extra credit, right? So upload a picture of you in your Halloween color or accessory or costume. You could also submit a past picture. So maybe you want to submit a photo of you when you were a little bitty person, a cutie, and we can see how cute you were, right? And we'll go, aw, how cute. Or maybe you have a pet who dresses up for Halloween. Now, last year, Princess Fufu was Tofu. Get it? And the year before that, she was Little Foo on the Prairie. That one sort of did not go over very well. I had a long calico dress for her and a bonnet. And so she just drug her rear end across the floor, continually trying to get out of the dress. And she howled and moaned and carried on. So I don't know what she's going to be yet. You'll have to check out her page to see what she's going to be this year. She had a costume failure one year when she was a ballerina. Didn't quite work out very well there. But anyway, you can receive some Halloween extra credit, and you'll see it on your syllabus there. And if you go to the assignments tab and look for Halloween extra credit, it'll also give you the instructions. So happy Halloween, everybody. I think it's going to be kind of different this year, but hopefully you can sit in your house and watch Charlie Brown Halloween or something and eat some candy and think ahead to next year when it's going to be so much better. I will see you next week. Thanks for watching.